Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and welcome to a very special Taliesin Talks. And a bit of a different one as well. Straight off the bat, I just want to say that I don't like making videos like this, to be honest. We're very proud on this channel of our production values and the work that goes into the videos and the editing and the scripting, so it always makes me a little bit uncomfortable when a video is just me sitting in front of a camera freestyling at you like some kind of rap meister, because I'm not a rap meister, Internet. I much prefer my scripts, but I felt like it kind of fitted the thing that I wanted to talk about today, because you will have noticed it's a very special day. That there 8.2 PTR is here, Internet. It's on the launcher, it's big, it's bulging, it's in your face, and of course our friends at Wowhead are currently in the middle of just picking that thing apart and diving in there. I mean, you can go in there and you can play it now, Mechagon, and you can play with the essences and the Heart of Azeroth and things like that, but in that code, hidden away, where only the professionals can find it, is a whole lot more stuff as well, which we can see on Wowhead now. There's stuff that we are going to talk about in depth in our proper scripted videos, like the weekly reset, in the weeks and months to come, like the customizable ring set bonuses from Mechagon. No one knew about those. All of the new models and mounts, the armor sets from the new raid, which are... they're fine, aren't they? They're fine. The Heart of Azeroth stuff, which we're going to go into in a lot of detail. I'm sure Preach already has a video out on it. But the thing I want to talk to you today, guys, is something a little bit more personal. Because when this thing popped up in the code, it affected me in a kind of an emotional way, in a way that I wasn't expecting. There's a blue bot spoiler warning in the corner there. That's another thing you're going to see a lot of in the coming weeks, by the way. And a blue bot spoiler warning on this channel means something that isn't like a major spoiler. It doesn't like give away the ending of a story or something. That's a red bot spoiler. That will be arriving a little bit later on. This is stuff that you're probably going to find out anyway, but it's still a spoiler. So bear that in mind. If you don't want to be spoiled at all about any of the 8.2 stuff, well, first of all, good luck. Secondly, don't be a dick. Go and watch something else. I'm not accepting any complaints, okay? No complaints at all. So the character I want to talk about today is Thrall, the ex-warchief of the Horde, Green Jesus, Chris Metzen himself. And this is Thrall as he is in game right now. This is me in my Horde garrison. Goh, that made me feel some feels as well, clicking on that old Hearthstone to go and meet this bad boy. And this is Thrall as I think of him. This is my Thrall in a way. And I've got a very complicated relationship with Thrall because he's always been a character in World of Warcraft that has made me feel a little bit icky. Now, that might sound weird to you, or you might recognise exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to go into more detail on it in a little moment, but Thrall has always made me feel a little bit... That sounds really vague and weird, so let me put it into context, and let me put it into the context of why this video even exists. Because, ladies and gentlemen, on the PTR, as part of this build, there is a new Thrall model. And he looks kind of like this. And when I say kind of, obviously I mean exactly like this. This is his new model. Now, obviously this model, as he appears now, is very different from what we've grown used to in the actual game World of Warcraft. When I first saw this, my emotions and reactions were manifold. First of all, I thought, Thrall's back. That was unexpected. Secondly, I thought, well, he looks incredibly square, doesn't he? Seriously, whatever program Thrall has been on, I need to get on that program. Both physically and follically, he is looking buff, and not like I was expecting at all. And thirdly, it made me think, I'm having all these feelings that I used to have about Thrall, and I'm not sure if I like them. So we're going to come back to this model in just a moment, and we're going to talk about what it means for the future of the game. We're going to actually look at some proper spoilery stuff in how he comes back into the game, and it's a scenario which involves another one of those great player choice moments, which I know we all love so much. And we're going to discuss what this new look kind of means for him as a character, and of course, in fact, for the future of the game. But before that, and the reason this video is taking this format, is my relationship with Thrall. Because it is complicated, and it's kind of linked intrinsically to my relationship with World of Warcraft. Very quickly, I promise. The story of Taliesin and World of Warcraft in regards to Thrall. Because I describe this as my Thrall, but this isn't what Thrall has always looked like by any means. The first Thrall that most Warcraft players will remember coming into contact with is this guy, your Warcraft 3 Thrall. And here he is in-game, sort of in all his wolf-riding, doomhammer-wielding glory. This is the first Thrall that many of you will have come into contact with his classic dark blue armor with gold trim, upright even then, by the way, and looking pretty badass, it has to be said. Like, this is Warrior Thrall, this is Warchief Thrall, this is the Thrall that cut a swathe through Kalimdor, liberated the Orcs from their internment camps, and founded Orgrimmar and the modern Horde. It's worth noting there is an earlier version of Thrall which comes from the old point-and-click Warcraft Lord of the Clans adventure, and here we see like this incredibly early iteration of the character in this game that famously never actually made it to the public. But the image that always sticks in my mind from Lord of the Clans of Thrall is this one, because this for me shows you Blizzard's intention behind Thrall the whole time. This is the face of a noble, heroic, much more human than we're used to orc. And this is what the whole intention behind Thrall was always meant to be. From the very start, Thrall was the orc that embodied goodness in the Horde, embodied nobleness and heroism and sympathy from us as a protagonist as well. And I think all of that is shown here really obviously with this very symmetrical, very determined, handsome looking face. And although that look did change substantially going into Warcraft 3, you can still see those characteristics existent in him there, as the kind of go-getting Horde leader leading from the front. And he's a character that has always been linked intrinsically with Chris Metzen, the big head honcho of the Warcraft lore and story, the guy that has always really set the direction of the modern franchise and the route the story is going to take. You can see this drawing here from 2004 that Metzen did of Thrall heroically holding the Doom Hammer aloft, symbolising his ascension in taking the place of Orgrim Doomhammer as the very heart of the Horde. And that carried on into vanilla. And again, for a huge swathe of players, this will be people's first experience, first look at Thrall. This will be many people's Thrall. And you can see he looks pretty much exactly like the Warcraft 3 Thrall. That kind of humanity that he was bestowed in all his other iterations is slightly diluted here because he's incredibly limited by having the orc model in vanilla, which was incredibly brutish, very animalistic. But in the things he does and the things he says, he still keeps that kind of very sympathetic protagonist view. He is the orc that wants to find peace. And sure, yeah, he'll do it by doing a lot of fighting, but his intentions are incredibly noble and very good. And he kept this model, this look, through vanilla, through Burning Crusade, through Wrath of the Lich King. But it's not my Thrall, internet. Because I started playing World of Warcraft in Wrath of the Lich King. I don't even really remember seeing this model. Part of that was because I played Alliance, and part of it was because I didn't give two shits about the lore of the game. I know it sounds really weird now, okay? Now I have it. Hi, welcome to my Warcraft-centric channel where I talk about lore and speculation and how much I love the story all the time. But back then, I really, really didn't. And so I didn't care about Thrall. I didn't know who he was. This is a Thrall that I have learnt about since. This is not my Thrall. This is not the Thrall I ever came into contact with. My first Thrall was Cataclysm Thrall, Shaman Thrall. And this Thrall, as well as looking incredibly different, plays a very different role in the expansion as a whole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our garrison here, because this is essentially the same model as his Cataclysm model. In Cataclysm, his coat is done up with like a chain belt and things like that. But that's details. This is essentially Thrall as he became in Cataclysm and beyond. And I know that in Cataclysm and Mr. Pandaria, he had much longer hair. We're going to get to that as well. But this is his look from then on in. You can see he still has the remnants of his dark blue and gold armor, but on top of that is this much more shamanistic look. This is the shamanistic Horde, this is the shamanistic Thrall, the older Thrall, the Thrall who's more in touch with the elements, the Thrall who has kind of ascended to being a much more powerful character in kind of all senses of the word. He steps aside as the warchief of the Horde to follow kind of his true calling as being, as many people would have called him, Green Jesus. And this is the problem a lot of people have with Thrall. Because back in Cataclysm, of course, the entire narrative is kind of centered around him. This is a character who not only is good and noble and always wants the right thing for the factions and the planets, but also pretty much single-handedly can make it happen as well. The name Mary Sue has been bandied around when it comes to Thrall, but actually you might as well just use his real name, Goel. Goel, which is basically Superman's name, Kyle. He's got a name which is like Superman. That should tell you everything you need to know about Thrall. And this is the Thrall that I first came into contact with. The Thrall who all the dragon aspects basically came and kissed the ass of at the end of Cataclysm, in the ending cinematic. It was Thrall that they thanked. It was me that had done the work, but it was Thrall that got all the fireworks. Well, good for him. So even though this is my Thrall, as you might be able to tell, I never really felt like I clicked with him. And another reason for that might be the way he looked. I kind of like his cool, like, Jedi coat over the plate armor here. This is really, really cool. The Doomhammer is obviously, like, the most awesome weapon ever made in its modern incarnation. But it's when you get to the top half of his body that I start having problems. There's the fact that he is upright, for a start. Now, this is something we see quite often in orc models these days, of course, but at the time he was the only orc that stood upright, and it just looked weird to me. It looked too human. Another thing that looked too human was his hairline here, and the way it was receding and shaved, much like many people I knew at the time who were getting older were doing. It just seemed a little bit too human to me. Nothing human about these beads, of course. These beads around his neck, again, a staple for monk transmogs now, but at the time we'd never really seen anything like it in WoW, and let's face it, it's shitting ridiculous. These beads around his neck are stupid. They look stupid. I don't know why they're there. I've always hated them. Pretty much my least favourite thing about Thrall. But generally the thing that got me about him was how human he looked. And I was always slightly disconcerted about how human he looked, because all the other orcs looked completely different. And I was like, why does he look so human? Now, of course, now I know the answer. And you know the answer too. It's because of one man. Chris Metzen. As I mentioned earlier, Chris Metzen is intrinsically linked with Goel, Thrall. He conceived the character, he put him at the centre of the Lord of the Clans game, he put him at the centre of the Warcraft 3 storyline, he plotted his trajectory throughout all of the Warcraft franchise, making him this central figure. If Thrall is a Jesus-like figure, Chris Metzen is the man that you need to blame about that. But it's not just that, is it? Because Chris Metzen is also the voice of Thrall. Because I'm not the first person to notice this, obviously, that one of the reasons Thrall looks so human is because he kind of looks a bit like Chris Metzen, doesn't he? You know, as Chris Metzen got a bit older and a bit more mellow, so did Thrall. And it's easy to see the personal journey of Chris Metzen reflected in at least the physical appearance of Thrall as well. As I learnt more about this game that was increasingly becoming a big part of my life, and as I learnt more about the developers behind it, and as I learnt more about the relationship between Chris Metzen and Thrall, it did kind of make me think, ooh. Because look, nothing against Chris Metzen, okay? He's an amazing guy. I've met him. He won't remember meeting us, but we've met him, and he's lovely. He's brilliant. And what he's done for World of Warcraft as a franchise and as a story is unrivaled, unparalleled, never to be repeated. The man is a god. Everyone loves him. So I'm not saying that he made Thrall a Jesus, godlike Superman character because he thought that of himself. No, he just wanted like a really cool character who was like the heart and soul of the Horde. There's an argument that the story of Warcraft is the story of Thrall, you know, and like everything that happens is kind of centered around his story, and that's fine, that's absolutely great. But knowing that those two characters are so intrinsically linked, and like little changes in Chris Metzen's life are kind of reflected in the life of Thrall a little bit, just made me feel a bit ooh. And that is not like a trash on Chris Metzen or his work in the slightest, just in the case of he and Thrall. So I was very happy, basically, when Thrall actually got taken down a peg in Legion after kill-stealing Garrosh twice, by the way. Once at the end of the Siege of Orgrimmar, when like we'd defeated Garrosh and we were like, boom, we got him, and then Thrall comes along and attempts to kill him with his hammer, screw you. And then actually in Warlords of Draenor as well, when we hunt Garrosh down and Thrall takes him out after kill stealing Garrosh Hellscream twice from our clutches in the Enhancement Shaman campaign, in the Enhancement Shaman artifact questline at the very beginning of Legion. Thrall reveals that he's essentially lost his powers. He can no longer commune with the elements. He's no longer like the most powerful shaman to have ever lived. His shaman powers have kind of abandoned him. He suspects because he blatantly cheated in the fight with Garrosh. But either way, the Thrall that we came into contact with at the beginning of Legion was a much more confused Thrall, a much more thoughtful Thrall, a Thrall who was objectively much less powerful than the character we'd come to know. And those characters are always so much more interesting, aren't they? So right at the very end of his input into Legion there, I actually had a little bit of a moment where I kind of felt for Thrall a bit, but only for a moment, because then of course he disappears again. Which brings us to Thrall in 8.2. So when I saw him appear on the 8.2 PTR in the data mining there, a number of emotions went through my head, like I say. Now, a lot of you might suspect that I would have been disappointed to see this character that I never really related to or connected with appear in the story again so quickly. I mean, we always knew that Thrall was going to come back because, well, we know that Chris Metzen has been in the studio recording lines for him and things like that. But I don't think any of us expected Thrall to come back this soon. And if you just told me that Thrall was coming back in 8.2, I'd have probably gone, do we need to? Does he really need to? And that's how I expected to feel when I clicked on the Wowhead link to look at his new model. I expected to be disappointed and maybe even slightly annoyed that Thrall was back in the game. But that's not how I felt. And part of that is because of what this new model says about Thrall, because there's a number of things that this model conveys and tells us about Thrall as a character and where he's been and what he's been doing and the differences and the changes that he as a character has undergone. First of all, there's the obvious stuff, like, he's been out of the game for maybe 2 years maximum, and he already has managed to go from literal shaved head to what is essentially, when it's unplaited, going to be waist-length hair. It turns out that Thrall has the fastest growing hair in the entire world. This is how virile Thrall is, okay? He can grow that beard and that hair like that, which it's worth mentioning out are actually quite reminiscent also of the changes that Chris Metzen has gone through since leaving Blizzard. He's also grown his hair out a little bit, and his beard in particular, and in fact there are quite explicit Chris Metzen-esque grey tufts in his beard here. This is still a character which kind of represents Chris Metzen in a number of ways. But of course the main difference that many of us will have noticed is just how square he is. If we compare him to our well, this is our Warlords of Draenor model, but the model that we've all grown accustomed to maybe, look how lithe and kind of tapered his waist is here, and how relatively, because obviously he's still veiny and muscly, but how relatively thin his arms are compared to this new model. This is a stocky, built, much physically bigger, stronger Thrall. And part of that, it might be, the old middle-age spread, which happens to us all, no shame in it, but it also says something about his character, because don't forget, this is a Thrall who has lost his connection with the elements. He's essentially, to put it very bluntly, lost his magic powers. So wherever he's been and whatever he's been doing, his physical body is being worked much, much more. He can't get elements to fight for him. He can't borrow the power of lightning to kill things with or attack things with. He can't jump on an elemental and fly places like, your basic Communal Garden shaman in the game can. This is a man who has lost his power. So wherever he's been hunting for himself, he's been building his lodgings for himself, he's been fighting all through his own physical strength, and as a result, his physical body has got much bigger and much stronger. This is a physical damage Thrall, not a nature damage Thrall, and that is shown in how much bigger and wider and squarer his body is. And I think that's really nice. I think that's really interesting. And it's a really cool thing to kind of pick up on and to represent in his in-game model. I'm a big fan of that. And of course, the other thing that we'll all have noticed is his outfit, his costume, because the way he's dressed obviously has some symbolic references as well, which we'll get to in just a moment. But generally, if you compare it to like if you compare it to Jedi Master Thrall, you know, second wave Thrall, we'll call him, Shaman Thrall, with his long Jedi coat, his flowing robes over his plate armor, and his stupid beads, then what he's wearing here is a lot more practical, it's a lot more low-key, and it's a lot more humble as well. This could easily be some kind of a peon outfit, really, when it comes down to it, with the leather bindings and the very simple knee pads and the simple gloves. The only thing that gives any kind of hint of status at all is this huge wolf pelt over his shoulders. And when I saw this, my first thought was, I really hope that's not his trusty riding wolf that's found its way over his shoulders there. I really hope things didn't get that desperate and lonely wherever he's been. But of course, it's probably not. This is actually probably much more a reference to the Frostwolf clan, because of course Thrall is a Frostwolf. His father was Durotan, who was killed by baddies, you know, and Thrall was brought up away from all of that. To see Thrall dressed like this is kind of weird, because of course he's never really been in touch with his Frostwolf roots. He never got a chance to. The first contact he ever had with them was in Warlords of Draenor, which should have been a lot more emotional than it actually turned out being, really, where he got to encounter his parents and his people alive and well. And this costume and its kind of Frostwolf links have made a lot of people theorise that actually maybe all of this time Thrall has been in alternate universe Draenor with the Frostwolves who still exist and with his father. I find that quite unlikely. I think a much more likely scenario is that he's been in Azeroth, but in some kind of solitude, having lost his powers. He's gone through a very kind of self-reflective period where being by himself and fending for himself and not having to be a leader in any way, not having to continue his shamanistic studies or anything like that, has made him quite naturally just reconnect with his roots and his people who he has since had a chance to actually meet and experience. And this kind of outward representation of his ancestral past shows how his life has become a lot more simple. And I think that's something everyone would agree with. This is Thrall as a much more straightforward character, maybe, than we'd been used to before. Definitely worth noting, by the way, one of my favourite things about this transmog is his armour is still there. We still get the glimpse of that dark blue armour underneath these leather chaps here, which kind of suggests in my head canon that he's actually wearing his plate armour underneath this leather, and at some point he's going to rip it off and reveal himself as like the hardcore warrior Thrall that we all knew was underneath all along. Obviously that's not going to happen, but I like it anyway. And when I saw this Thrall who was stripped of his powers and of his prestige and of his status, this Thrall who has obviously been through immense physical hardship since we saw him last, this Thrall who is much more humble and connected with the world around him than he was even as the master shaman that he was before, it made me think, damn, that's really cool. And for the first time ever, just seeing this model, I kind of clicked with the idea of Thrall in a way that I never really had before. So that's what we gathered just from this model, but why is he back in 8.2 at all? Well, I'm going to put up the red spoiler bot warning now, ladies and gentlemen, because we are going to have a look at why through data mining broadcast text that is being dragged out of the code from Wowhead about the upcoming war campaign. A war campaign that will centre around everyone's favourite factory farm cow, Baine Bloodhoof. Now, as you know, Baine Bloodhoof is a big dirty traitor to the Horde and has been arrested by Sylvanas in that big scene in Stormsong Valley where poor old Zelig gets shot by Nathanos and, among others, Tauren guards arrest Baine Bloodhoof, and we haven't seen him since. But in 8.2, we do see him again. Here he is, all chained up in Orgrimmar, awaiting, it turns out, his execution. Now, the mission chain that we go on, whether we are Alliance or Horde, is called Stay of Execution, and it's incredibly interesting for a number of reasons. Number one most interesting reason is that Stay of Execution has 3 different scenarios. There's a scenario for the Alliance, there's a scenario for the Horde that stayed loyal to Sylvanas, and there's a scenario for the Horde that chose to align themselves with Saurfang and Baine. So those choices that you made in those Saurfang missions that you did before, and the Baine mission where you had the choice of whether to dob in Saurfang to Sylvanas or to keep his secret and lie to her, will have an effect on these scenarios. How big an effect? I don't know, but there is more player choice coming in 8.2, which is something I think is wonderful. We'll talk about that more a little bit, and I think it's also very, very important when it comes to a storyline that purposely divides the player base within the Horde like this. So that's the first really interesting thing about it. The second interesting thing is that, of course, this is where Thrall makes his appearance. In that scene where Baine Bloodhoof was arrested, if you were a Horde player and you witnessed that, and you were obviously in the cinematic as well, in those cool like in-game cutscenes, after that happened you had a chance to go around and talk to every single one of the Horde leaders to get their opinions on what had just happened. And like some of the leaders, like Talanji, are a bit kind of on the fence. They're like, oh, I didn't really like that, but you know, we've only just joined the Horde, let's keep our heads down. Some are totally in favour of it, like the Magar Orc leader, who's like, yeah, did you see that? Sylvanas just totally owned that traitor. Let's go full Sylvanas. This is awesome. I love the Horde. I'm glad we joined. And some are a lot more wary, like the High Mountain Tauren, who are a bit like, oh, this is not what we signed up for. And in particular, Rexxar, who is kind of like our eyes and ears in much of the Horde campaign. And he says words to the effect of, this is not good. This is not what the Horde is all about. There is someone who needs to know of this. And I think most of us, when we read those lines, assumed that he was talking about Saurfang, of course, who we've already spent a lot of time with in this expansion, who currently is still hiding out somewhere in Azeroth, dressed quite similar to this, it has to be said, in lots of brown leather. Orcs, when they go into hiding and spend time by themselves, apparently just wear dark brown leather. That's what they do. But it turns out we weren't talking about Saurfang, we were talking about Thrall. Because it's him that we do this mission with to rescue Baine Bloodhoof. And I don't know what the differences between these scenarios are, whether you stayed loyal to Sylvanas or to Saurfang. I don't know what differences they are. We won't know that until it's like playable on the PTR. But another interesting thing about it is that halfway through, in all three of these scenarios, Horde and Alliance team up to rescue Baine Bloodhoof. So Thrall has only been back in the game 5 minutes, and already he's getting Horde and Alliance to work together and defeat their enemies through the power of friendship. That is so Thrall though, isn't it? And there are other like locations and character names just in the titles of the different stages of this scenario, which are quite interesting as well, but that don't relate to what we're talking about, because this is why we have the return of Thrall in 8.2, is because he comes back specifically to rescue Baine. And not for the first time, Thrall makes a return to the machinations of the Horde to specifically make a stand against the current warchief, which I know does not help those accusations of the story of BFA being Sylvanas is Garrosh 2.0, which I think is very unfair. Because yes, you're right. Thrall arriving, if you are the warchief and Thrall comes back and starts like disagreeing with the stuff you're doing, usually that does not end traditionally well for you as a warchief. We saw it with Garrosh. It seems to be happening with Sylvanas now. But I think the division in the Horde in BFA is a lot more nuanced, a lot more two-sided, and intentionally so in BFA than it ever was in Mists of Pandaria. Don't forget that in Mists of Pandaria, we were told before that expansion even started that the final boss of the whole expansion was Garrosh Hellscream. We knew that he was going to be a big baddie. We knew that we were going to take him out, all of us, no matter what we thought of him. At the end of the expansion, we knew that he would become bad. And the story of that expansion was us following how he did that. That's not what's happening with BFA. With BFA still, if you go onto the forums or even talk to people in game, that division between people that are loyal to Sylvanas on the Horde side and those that favour Saurfang and now Baine Bloodhoof and Thrall as well, there is a genuine split in the Horde. In the player base character, my troll shaman is a shaman, so naturally is going to follow Baine and Saurfang and go against Sylvanas and all that. But honestly, that's only for RP reasons. All my other Horde characters are 100% Team Sylvanas, because I really like how Sylvanas is just like, no, we're doing things my way now, boys, and the Horde is going to survive at all costs. And I don't care what we have to do it. Leave all those pussies on the Alliance to do their own thing. Leave all the pussies in the Horde to do their own thing. We're doing it my way. My way is a good way. Like, I like Sylvanas as a character much more since she's been leader of the Horde and been acting this way. And what she represents and the way she does things, I know there's all the memes about genocide and things like that, but genuinely a lot of players are willing to go with that and thoroughly enjoy being a part of that in this fantasy pretend setting. That being said, a lot of players will be looking towards Saurfang and Baine and Thrall as being the true heart, the more old-fashioned soul of the Horde. That's the Horde that they signed up to all those years ago. And that is what this Thrall represents. He's a back to basics Thrall. He's a throwback Thrall, a throwback to his own roots in the Frostwolf clan, but also to the older Horde and the original intentions behind the Horde. And I think that's cool. I think that's awesome. And when I saw this model, despite my feelings towards Thrall the character, despite my complicated history with him throughout the game, when I saw this model, I thought, hey, you know what? That might be a Thrall that I can relate to. Given a bit of time, given a bit of focus, maybe this could be my Thrall. So what do you think, guys? What do you think of this new model and its place in the PTR? Are you happy to see Thrall back? Are you one of those people that's like, oh no, no more Goel, no more Green Jesus, Metzen, give it a rest? Or have you been champing at the bit, waiting for his return to come and rescue the Horde throughout this entire expansion? I'd genuinely be interested to know your thoughts on this matter below. And thank you once again for joining me in this much more personal, heartfelt, rambly video than we usually have. I just thought it was going to be appropriate for the subject at hand. Thank you for indulging me, and thank you for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make all of our videos happen. If it wasn't for you guys, there'd be a whole lot less Taliesin Evitel, so genuinely thank you. And if you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Goel. My name is Goel. No, my name is Taliesin. We will be giving all of the attention to the 8.2 stuff that it deserves in the weekly reset on the weekend. But for now, from me, Taliesin, and Evitel as well, until next time, cheerio.